Good evening, all. Welcome to ISA WebCon Kerala 2020 Delegate Poster Presentation session. We have totally 11 posters, and to judge these posters, we have with us judges Dr. Lieutenant Colonial Krishna Prasad, Dr. Shankar Narayana, and Dr. Radesh and Dr. Sharad. Judges and presenters, kindly note, you have allotted total 5 minutes, 4 minutes of presentation and 1 minute for Q&A. I repeat, 4 minutes for presentation and 1 minute for Q&A. At the 4th minute, the presenter will get a voice alert which says 1 minute left. So the judges ready?
Yeah, please, ma'am.
Yeah. So we have with us our first presenter, Dr. Fifina. Dr. Fifina.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Fifina, share your screen.
Okay, ma'am.
And more.
Am I audible, ma'am? Hello? Hello?
Unmute yourself. Yeah. Yes. Go to the presentation mode.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
And yes, you're audible. And your time starts now.
Respected judges, faculty, delegates, and participants, a very warm good evening to all. Myself, Dr. Fifna, and I am happy to get the opportunity to present poster in this platform. It's about exit procedure, one of the rare procedure done in many of the institutes, and only 6 cases done in our institute so far. And I was so lucky to be a part of the recent one done in our institute. So exit procedure means ex utero intrapartum procedure, which allows controlled delivery of the fetus with life-threatening diseases. This is executed on a partially delivered infant, so also known as operation on placental support procedure. It requires anesthesiologists to take care of 2 patients at once, with often different and times of conflicting needs. This is an important treatment option in the management of certain congenital prenatally diagnosed fetal anomalies like cervical teratoma, cystic hygroma, congenital high airway obstruction, congenital goiter, and CDH following fetal procedure. Ours was a cervical mass arising from the lower border of the mandible till suprasternum. Our plan was to give general anesthesia with a rapid sequence induction. The main difference between exit and LSES were exit procedure requires complete uterine relaxation, whereas LSES requires uterine contraction. We usually prefer to give low MAC in case of LSES, whereas we will give higher MAC of about 2 to 3 in case of exit procedure in order to maintain complete uterine relaxation. We prefer to give GA in exit procedure, whereas we will give GA in LSES only if there is any contraindication is there for regional anesthesia. Another important difference is that we will give opioid to mother only after delivery of the baby because we are afraid of neonatal respiratory depression. But here in exit procedure, there is no harm in giving opioid to mother before delivery of the baby, or in another way, it will be beneficial for providing adequate uterine relaxation also, because here anyway, the baby will be intubated. Ours was a 32-year-old primary gravida. Growth was noticed in the cervical region during the 27-week antenatal scan, which increased in size at 32-week, mass with a solid and cystic component measuring 98 mm into 60 mm into 68 mm. So the exit was done at 32 week. In addition to the standard monitors, we also used arterial line which was secured before induction itself. Additional wide-bore IV cannula was also secured. To provide adequate uterine relaxation, sevoflurane in oxygen and air with a higher MAC of 2 to 3 was used. An additional fetal anesthesia was administered with IM fentanyl 10 mg per kg and atropine 5 mg per kg. Sonologist will be giving medication to baby via umbilical artery or via IM injection into thigh after induction and before uterine incision so that it
1 minute left.
by the time of exit being done. Initially, we thought of giving medication via umbilical vessels, but here in our case, the alignment of the placenta was posterior, so injecting into the umbilical vessels might be difficult. That's why we go ahead with giving IM injection. At least some of you might be wondering why opioid to the baby. This is to reduce the struggling during intubation effort. If struggles allowed and starts coming out because of slippery amniotic fluid, and if it get delivered more, uterus start contracting and placenta start separating. So the whole plan of maintaining on placental circulation will be lost. We want fetal circulation to be intact until delivery. And after that, partial delivery of the baby was done, that is head and one arm. The only fetal monitor which was used was sterile pulse oximeter. Our aim is to maintain saturation above 75%. We were able to intubate with the video laryngoscope without any difficulty. Baby was fully delivered within 5 minutes. Cord and placental delivery was done. After that, we reduced the MAC and administration of uterotonic.
Dr. Fifina, time up.
1 minute, ma'am. Mother was reversed normally without any complication. Baby was extubated on day 2. So the conclusion is this is a novo important treatment option. Specialized and crucial anesthetic management is very important. Well coordinated multidisciplinary team effort is the key effort. These all are my references. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to the judges. Dr. Krishna Prasad.
Good evening, Dr. Fefina. It was a very good conducted case. And can you please let me know how did you counsel this patient before taking up for the surgery? And what was your plan B?
Thorough preoperative evaluation and counseling is very important because this is a normal case, because the mother will be knowing that they can't see a normal child, their baby will be intubated and all. So that stress they should understand before the surgery, and we should counsel them prior to the procedure, and we need their consent. And the plan.
What specially, how did you counsel the mother and the father? And what was your plan B in this case?
Plan B was here the cervical mass was compressing the trachea, but there was no mechanical compression. So we thought that we can go ahead with the video laryngoscope. Our plan B was to do tracheostomy. So ENT surgeons were also scrubbed in.
Tracheostomy.
Sir?
Tracheostomy.
Tracheostomies.
Okay.
And if we are not able to do the tracheostomy also, then our plan was to do emergency decompression and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Shankar, some disturbance is there. Thank you, Dr. Fipa and Dr. Krishna. We'll move to our next session.
Thank you, ma'am.
Nutan. We have with us Dr. Nutan. Nutan,
Yes,
please share your
yes,
screen.
Yes, I'm not able to share.
You will get a share screen, green color button in the Zoom.
Yes, ma'am, but I'm not able to get access to my computer.
Are you in Zoom, right? Are you using the browser or the laptop?
Laptop, ma'am.
Yeah. Share screen. Using a Windows or a Mac?
Windows, ma'am. I'm not able to get access to my computer. Just a
Okay, we'll
second.
move to the next session. Next
Speaker, ma'am.
presenter,
Yeah.
Joy. Dr. Joy.
Yes, madam.
Yes, Dr. Joy, can you share your screen?
Yes, madam. 1 minute.
Judges, please
Can you-
note, this is Dr. Joy, serial number
Yes.
3.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. I think you have logged in the browser also. Maybe you have logged into virtual conference.
Am I audible, madam?
Yes, yes, you're audible. And your time starts now.
Okay, thank you, madam. Respected judges, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to wish you all good health and safety in the challenging times of COVID-19. I thank you all for your valuable time to listen to my poster presentation titled Pediatric Caudal Epidural Anesthesia, Reviving the Good Old Prawn Position. So as we know, since a successful caudal epidural is of utmost importance in simplifying the anesthetic management of a child. Hence, I thought it would be prudent to retrospect whether we are doing the procedure in the best possible method. So hence now I am comparing prone and lateral position. Though the prone technique is known, it is already documented, very few are using it. And even fewer, actually very few know about it, and even fewer are using it in their daily practice. So I thought I would highlight the advantages of prone position in pediatric caudal epidural. But prior to that, I would like to describe the preparation and method, which is of utmost importance before doing this procedure in the prone position. So first of all, a proper pre-anesthetic checkup is necessary, and consent should be taken. Then I would make sure that the monitors and the machine are checked properly. And after that, I would load the neuraxial drug under strict aseptic precautions. I would load it before shifting the child. So I would opt for a bupivacaine 0.25% according to the Armitage rule. And I also would advise not to use lignocaine because we can avoid the complications of lignocaine, which can go undetected if the child is deeply sedated. And also it will reduce the chances of a complete perfect block because lignocaine will only dilute the effect of bupivacaine. So what we require is a total motor block. And I would also load the induction drugs beforehand. And the induction drugs that I use here is a single shot of atropine, ketamine, and midazolam according to the weight per kg. I mean, per kg dosage. So I would load this beforehand, and I would also keep rescue bolus doses of ketamine ready to use during the procedure. So once all this is done and the monitors are all checked properly, I would shift the child and give a single shot of induction agent and also position the child in supine position simultaneously, connecting all the monitors. And I will make sure that the respiration is supported adequately until the child starts breathing on its own. So once the child starts breathing and the vitals are stable,
1 minute left.
Vitals are stable, I would position the child in the prone position, keeping the face turned sideward, and apply a transparent mask to connected to oxygen to the face. Then I would keep a roll sheet or soft sandbag under the hip and connect all the monitors. Then I would confirm the child's respiration and airway to be all right. After this only, I will make sure that I start the procedure under strict aseptic precautions by palpating the sacral hiatus and introducing the needle at 45 degrees to skin and then directing it carefully at an angle close to the long axis of spine. And just before the needle prick, I might use a ketamine bolus if required, just to avoid a light play. Then I would aspirate and confirm no CSF and administer the drug, provided there's no resistance to plunger. So now I would like to highlight the advantages of this prone position. First of all, the airway is more protected, the stem falls forward, and there's fogging on the mask which reassures breathing, and this can be seen by the anesthetist who's doing the procedure. You can also visualize the chest movements better if a small hole towel is used, and you can see the ribcage movements. So there is a better overall view for the anesthetist during the procedure. No additional help is required to hold the child, and we don't have
Joy,
to.
timer.
Yes, ma'am. And so we can palpate the sacral. The main thing is we can palpate the sacral hiatus more conveniently in this position. And but in lateral position, we require more team members. They have to take care of the airway. Then the anesthetist doing the procedure cannot have an overall view of the event, and also the person holding has to be perfectly still. So my conclusion is that prone caudal technique seems to have more advantages than lateral, and we should consider this technique provided it has to be practiced more and under proper senior guidance. So it will be a better option doing prone caudal techniques. Thank you, madam.
Dr.
Thank
Joy,
you, Dr. Joy. Yeah.
Dr. Joy, it is a good concept what you are revisiting. But tell me, is prone is really safe for you to, in the view of airway, if something goes wrong, you induce whatever with the ketamine or something,
Yes,
and in the prone, you are at least you will take some time to clean drape, and you are using, I think, as per your for pictures, I realize it is without ultrasound. You are using landmark technique, right?
Yes, sir. I'm using a landmark technique.
So you tell me in view of airway, and second is what is the spread of the drug, and if at all some complication happens, how do you tackle compared to lateral position?
Okay, sir. Actually, the airway, that is why I mentioned that I will load all the drugs beforehand in a strict aseptic precaution. And also, only when I confirm that the child is breathing spontaneously, then only I will turn the child with of course, I will have a co-anesthetist with me because I'm not going to handle a child all on myself. So my co-anesthetist will be there to help to position the child. But this will be done only when the child is breathing spontaneously and the vitals are stable. So once that is done and positioned, then only we will go ahead with the procedure. But since the drug is already preloaded, we can finish the procedure as fast as possible.
Why
So
don't you
is,
use ultrasound while giving the block?
Ultrasound, it can delay the time, so we might have to give a lot of sedation. So
that's right, absolutely delay in time. But as per the ASA guidelines, you have to use ultrasound wherever it is possible, whether it is central line, wherever intervention you are doing, you have to use, no, as per the guidelines.
Yes, sir. But thing is, in my institute, I have not started using ultrasound for pediatric caudal. I think that's actually I should do that also.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next session?
Yes.
Next
please,
talk. Thank you, Dr. Joy and Dr. Krishna.
Thank you, madam.
Judges, next will be Dr. Leena. Dr. Leena, kindly share your screen.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Rohan? Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Rohan,
share your screen.
Can you see it now?
Click on the share screen.
Yeah, I have done it.
Open your PPT.
I've opened it. Can you see it now?
We can see your desktop. Yes, yes.
Mm. Can you see it now?
Yes, Dr. Leena, your time starts now.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Good evening to everybody, and I wish everybody, all the organizers, a happy Kerala Day. Now, I'm Dr. Leena Shibu from Maima Medical College, Talegaon. I'll be presenting a case of submandibular abscess incision and drainage done under superficial cervical plexus block. Now, odontogenic infections may drain into facial spaces adjacent to oral cavity and later may spread to respiratory passage and may obstruct the patent airway. Now, giving general anesthesia in such situations can be challenging, but loco-regional anesthesia may avoid complications associated with general anesthesia. Submandibular space infection is one of such infections occurring in the floor of mouth, and in severe cases, this abscess may cause displacement of tongue and airway. Cervical plexus block provide effective anesthesia and analgesia for head and neck and maxillofacial surgery. Under that, superficial cervical plexus block is worth consideration in such situations because the site of injection infiltration is usually away from the intended area of incision and drainage. So we got a patient, 50-year-old male. He presented with submandibular abscess as shown in figure 1, and he was posted for incision and drainage. Patient was diabetic, hypertensive, and had chronic bronchitis with upper respiratory tract infection. His MPC was grade 3. Mouth opening was 2-finger and short neck, as can be seen in figure 2. Now we opted for a landmark procedure of superficial cervical plexus block as shown in figure 3, and that is at the midpoint of posterior border of sternocleidomastoid muscle, that is from the incision of mastoid process to the clavicular head of the sternocleidomastoid. Midpoint of that, a 24 gauge 1.5-inch needle was inserted and a fan-shaped infiltration was done, as can be seen in figure 3. Now, the drug used for the local infiltration was 1.5% of lignocaine adrenaline, a volume of 5 ml, and bupivacaine 10 ml in the concentration of 0.25%. That is, total 15 ml of solution was used for infiltration. As a result of this, we got a good surgical plane as well as a weak and comfortable patient. The hemodynamics of the patient was stable, and this resulted in a prolonged post-operative pain relief, avoidance of difficult airway manipulation. Thus, superficial cervical plexus block provides significant intraoperative pain control for drainage of submandibular abscess. This modality of regional anesthesia can be used for such cases. It is an effective alternative to general anesthesia in high-risk cases with high success rate and low complication rate, as well as low cost, and in the absence of high-end gadgets like fiber optic bronchoscope are not. Thank you. And these are my references.
Thank you, Dr. Leena. Over to the judges. Dr. Shankar Narayan.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yeah. Good case report, but I was worried because of the pus. Whether your local anesthetic will act.
So this was a typical lobulated right side, and the posterior border was free. It was not involved. That is why I mentioned in some cases it could be done.
Okay. What was your plan B if superficial cervical plexus block fails?
We were thinking of simple laryngoscopy under inhalation and some sedation. If we were able to see the epiglottis, we were planning to intubate. As well as of this, plan C would be tracheostomy because we did not know the patient had bronchitis as well as upper respiratory tract infection. So we did not know about the inner side, whether it was the passage was inside the in the airway also. And as the incision and drainage was done by the ENT surgeon, the plan C of tracheostomy was also kept.
Dr. Sir, some disturbance.
Dr. Lina ma'am, it's a good case you conducted, but one of my query was same as Dr. Shankaranarayan Rose. And second thing, definitely when swelling cellulitis, I think landmark will be little tough. And
Very
second thing, did you use any sedation along with this?
No, I did not use any sedation. Patient was thankfully very cooperative because I was not aware he was having bronchitis as well as upper respiratory tract infection.
Okay,
so we
thank you.
avoided any sedation.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Lina.
Thank you.
We have with us Dr. Nutan. Judges, kindly note. Dr. Nutan,
Should I start? Should I start, ma'am?
serial number 2, Dr. Nutan.
Yes.
Dr. Nutan,
Yes, ma'am.
your time starts now.
Good evening, everyone. Myself, Dr. Nutan Kharge from St. GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai, presenting USG-guided lumbar and sacral plexus block for hip fracture surgery in high-risk elderly patients who are having severe cardiac dysfunction and respiratory disease. Elderly patients are associated with multiple comorbid conditions. Posted for the hip fracture surgery pose a medical challenge for an anesthesiologist and are often associated with the perioperative morbidity and mortality. Central neuraxial block can cause hemodynamic instability, whereas general anesthesia can cause respiratory complication and post-operative cognitive dysfunction in such high-risk elderly patients. So use of peripheral nerve block like combined lumbar and sacral plexus block has been an effective method of anesthesia with better hemodynamic stability and good post-operative analgesia. I am presenting two cases posted for the, both were posted for the intertrochanteric femur fracture surgery. First case was 87-year-old female patient, known case of hypertension, COPD with chronic kidney disease on antihypertensive and bronchodilator treatment. Her lab investigations were within normal limit, except serum creatinine was 1.8 milligram per deciliter. Her ECG showed atrial fibrillation with a ventricular rate of 90 beats per minute. Her 2D echo findings were severe tricuspid regurgitation, moderate MR, mild AR, moderate pulmonary hypertension with mean pulmonary artery pressure was 43 millimeter of mercury. Ejection fraction was 60%. And severely dilated LA. LA size was 45 into 51 millimeter of. Second case was 75-year-old male patient, known case of hypertension, COPD, had history of ischemic heart disease 4 years back and history of stroke with left-sided hemiparesis 2 years back. Hemiparesis was recovered with conservative treatment. A written his lab investigations were within normal limit. His ECG showed ventricular premature beats with T-wave inversion in first AVL and V4 to V6 leads. 2D echo finding was his ejection fraction was 20% with global LV hypokinesia. A high-risk written informed consent was taken. After taking the patient inside the operation theater, all standard monitors were attached. Central line cannulation was done for CVP-guided fluid and for inotropic support if needed. Radial artery cannulation was done for blood pressure monitoring. Patient was placed in lateral position with operative side up. USG guided and using USG and PNS, lumbar sacral block was given in paramedian sagittal plane at L3, L4 level using curvilinear probe with in-plane technique. For lumbar plexus, injection bupivacaine 0.5%, 12 ml, and injection lignocaine 2%, 10 ml was given. For sacral plexus, injection bupivacaine 8 ml, 0.5%, and injection lignocaine 2%, 10 ml.
1 minute
was
left.
given. Intraoperatively, both patients were hemodynamically stable. Procedure was uneventful. Post-operatively, patient was shifted to ICU for monitoring. On discussion part, GI and central neuroaxial block could cause hemodynamic instability. So lumbar and sacral plexus block was given considering this patient's age and cardiac status. Advantages of peripheral nerve block are they provide stable hemodynamics intraoperatively as well as postoperatively with lesser complication and good postoperative analgesia that leads to improved patient satisfaction, early ambulation, and decreased length of hospital stay. On conclusion about combined lumbar and sacral plexus block using dual technique, USG and PNS provides an effective anesthesia along with the better hemodynamics, stability, and post-operative analgesia, making it a better alternative to GA or central neuroaxial block. Use of peripheral nerve stimulator along with the USG increases the efficiency and safety of the procedure, especially for such deeper advanced block. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Nutan, it is a well-conducted case. I also use so many cases for a geriatric patient with multiple comorbidities as lumbosacral plexus block. But you tell me, what were the complications you can expect in lumbar plexus block other than hematoma? These are routine. But which one emergency you can ready to tackle that?
Inadvertent neuroaxial block.
Yeah. So how did you prepare in this case?
We have kept everything ready. If patient has a higher level of a block, we can convert this in general anesthesia also. If a patient cardiovascular instability occurs.
Obviously, with this patient, with whatever the echo finding and renal failure and this thing, it is quite dicey in this case. So,
yes,
can we do any other methods? Can you think of any other methods other than, okay, you did a case uneventful, it is very good, but
yes,
what maybe the second plan you can think of?
General anesthesia.
No, other than general anesthesia.
Other than general anesthesia. Unilateral low dose spinal.
Yeah, unilateral low dose like 0.8 ml, keep it for some time. And even some people use spinal catheter and they start with the case with 0.5 ml. Then if required, they can substitute with the spinal catheters. Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Dr. Shankar Narayan, please.
Sir, you can unplug the earphone and speak, sir. Unplug the earphone. Disconnect from your laptop or device or mobile.
Hello.
Yes, now it is very audible, sir.
Audible?
Yeah, no disturbance. Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So you have done very nicely cases. Can epidural may be used?
Yes, sir. Can be used.
Low dose spinal with the epidural as backup or?
Yes, sir. But one patient has a very poor ejection fraction was 20% with global NV hypokinesia that can cause cardiovascular collapse. So peripheral nerve block would be the better option.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, judges. We have Dr. Meenu now. Dr. Meenu?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah. Can you share your screen?
Ma'am, I have shared screen.
Open.
Is it visible? Ma'am, is it visible?
Not yet. Start your video.
Okay.
Open your PPT. Yes, go to the presentation mode.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, Dr. Meenu, your time starts now. Your time starts now.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Meenu Thomas. I'm presenting a case report titled The Mississippi Mystery. Okay, moving on to the case report. A 22-year-old male was posted for ventricular peritoneal surgery after diagnosing with acute space-occupying lesion with hydrocephalus. He was given injection vancomycin, 1 gram intravenous, 1 hour before the procedure after test dose. Immediately following the infusion, he developed rashes, itching, piloerection, dyspnea. He became erythematous and unconscious. On examination, his airway was threatened. He developed desaturation, had a narrow feeble pulse with cold extremities and hypotension. The first diagram shows the rashes and piloerection, which developed immediately after the vancomycin injection. This is how we managed the case. He was given 100% oxygen at 10 liters per minute. Injection adrenaline, 100 micrograms low IV was given immediately. His airway was secured by rapid sequence intubation with injection midazolam 2.5 mg IV, injection glycopyrrolate 0.2 mg IV, injection succinylcholine 100 mg IV, and cuffed endotracheal tube of size 8. Following that, injection vecuronium 8 mg IV was given. His hypotension was managed with fluids and vasopressors. We also administered injection hydrocortisone 200 mg IV and phenuramin maleate 1 ampere slow IV. Arterial line and central venous line were secured under aseptic precautions. After this initial management, the FiO2 was reduced. The anesthesia was maintained using 50% oxygen, nitrous oxide, and sevoflurane. MAC was around 1. We observed him for an hour and ensured his vitals were stable. He was taken up for surgery owing to the emergent primary situation after discussion with surgeon and getting proper consent. Intraoperative period was uneventful and surgery was completed successfully. Post-surgery, a direct laryngoscopy was done to assess his airway and it was found normal. We could extubate the patient successfully and post-op period was also uneventful. The second diagram shows the patient intubated after resuscitation. The angioedema developed is clearly visible. Now moving on to the discussion, vancomycin, also known as the Mississippi mud, can cause two types of hypersensitivity reactions. One is the red man syndrome, second is the anaphylaxis. Red man syndrome, the most common hypersensitivity reaction of this drug, has been associated with rapid infusion of the first dose of the drug. This is an anaphylactic reaction caused by degranulation of mast cells and basophils, resulting in the release of histamine independent of preformed IgE or complement after a rapid infusion. Serum tryptase levels could be used to differentiate between the two. Conclusion, rapid infusion of pre-operative antibiotics can cause severe anaphylactic reactions like red man syndrome. Longer infusion time or pre-treatment with antihistamines could ameliorate the situation. Now, the key learning points from my presentation are: emphasis should be given on the pre-operative checklist so as to ensure patient safety. Importance of crash
1 minute left.
To deal with life-threatening emergencies. Vigilance should be maintained while giving full dose even if the test dose was found normal. The difference between the anaphylaxis and anaphylactic reaction should be known to us. Timing of surgery after an event. These are my references. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you, teachers.
Thank you, Meenu. Over to the judges.
Dr. Meenu, it is you noticed early and prevented the mishap. Can you tell me about why it is called as Mississippi mud?
Yes, sir, I can.
I am not clear. I think you have to increase your volume.
Just a minute, sir.
Hello?
Hello, sir. Is
Yeah. Yeah, tell me. Yeah. Hello?
Sir, hello.
Yeah, tell me why it is called as Mississippi mud.
Sir, vancomycin was invented during the 1950s, and the crude forms were not so purified, and that was brown in color, and
yeah,
that is why it is known as the Mississippi mud, sir.
Okay.
It was found out from the jungles of Borneo, a jungle in Southeast Asia.
Okay. After you noticed this reaction, what next documentary things you have done from your institute? what you're supposed to do after these kind of reactions, whether it is anaphylactoid or anaphylaxis, what pharmaco documentation we have to do along with the discharge of the patient and other prior formalities.
Sir, we reported this as an incident, sir, in the hospital.
Pardon, your voice is not clear.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, tell me, your voice is not clear. So.
Okay, sir. Sir, we have reported this as an incident. Incident reporting system is there in our hospital, sir.
Okay. So if you see patient safety protocols, what all things you have to do in this kind of situation?
So we have a pre-operative checklist, sir.
No, that you have done. That you have done. I agree totally with you. But after this, what all documentation you have to do?
Sir, we should be we should prevent further mishaps. So we should have a guideline regarding the management of anaphylaxis, and we could teach the staff to deal with such emergencies. A close monitoring can be done. Then, sir, slow infusion can be when we are giving antibiotics, especially. We should give test a slow infusion. Do not push the antibiotics along.
Okay, Dr. Shankar Narayan, please.
Sir, unmute.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
The presentation was not clear. I'm not able to hear the presentation clearly. But regarding vancomycin-induced anaphylaxis, no?
Your voice is not audible, Dr. Meenu.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Meenu, and thank you, judges. We'll move to the next. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Meenu.
Okay.
We'll move to our next presenter. We have with us Dr. Rajendra Kiran. Dr. Rajendra, kindly share your screen.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. Just a moment, ma'am. Is my presentation visible, ma'am?
Yeah, we can see a white screen. Is that your presentation? Yeah.
Is it visible now?
Yes.
Yeah.
And your time starts now.
Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, your time starts now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Rajendra Kiran. Am I audible, ma'am? Okay.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Rajendra Kiran, second year postgraduate from Konisima Institute of Medical Sciences, Andhra Pradesh. And my poster is about importance of history taking and correlating with other clinical parameters regarding planning, regarding establishing a plan for anesthesia. And this is a case which happened at our institute. And this is a case about a 28-year-old female of G2P1L1 who approached for a safe confinement at our institute. And regarding her history, upon the history taking, she had a dyspnea which started upon the 4 months of amenorrhea. She had easy fatigability, and her dyspnea is of grade 2 type, and she had exertion upon which is exacerbated upon exertion, and upon on examination she had left upper limb which is relatively shorter than her right upper limb, and there is also her thumb and thenar eminence is also absent regarding her left upper limb. Regarding her vitals are stable and pulse rate is also regular. Her PP is 120 over 80 mm of Hg, and her auscultation reveals, the cardiac auscultation reveals the first and second heart sounds are normal, but whereas there is a split which is observed in the second heart sound, and there is also an ejection systolic murmur is audible in the pulmonary area, and her respiratory auscultation showed no added sounds. And regarding her investigations, her CBP, serum electrolytes, RBS, RFT, and coagulation profiles are normal, and whereas our ECG shows a first degree heart block with a prolongation of PR interval, and her 2D echo reveals ASD which is ostium secundum type, and and her EF is 60%, and she had RV dilatation and no RWMA. And after her delivery, after her cesarean delivery, she had she was subjected to a chest X-ray which showed the cardiomegaly. And after discussing with our physician, a cardiologist, and obstetrician, epidural anesthesia was chosen as a plan of anesthesia, and the monitoring is done using a pulse oximetry and 5-lead ECG, and NIBP, and urine input and outputs. And during the intraoperatively, an epidural anesthesia is planned, which is inserted at L3, L4 space, which is confirmed by loss of resistance technique, and a test dose is given. And after which the drugs are 10 ml of 2% lignocaine was given, and her sensory block was recorded at 13 minutes, and onset was at 13 minutes, and motor block onset is at 15 minutes. And her level of block is up to the level of T6. And after which the second dose was given with a 5 ml of lignocaine and 5 ml of 0.5% bupropion, which was repeated after 40 minutes of the first dose. And her regarding her vitals, she landed into a hypotension, which is corrected with the vasopressors. And her SpO2 is maintained between 90 to 95% range with a 5-liter oxygen using nasal cannula. And at the end of the procedure, ectopic beats are developed at the ECG, and which are corrected using the Zalokard 2% IV stat. And during the postoperative period, the analgesia is maintained during with epidural top-ups using the 8 ml of 0.125% bupropion, and for which also she developed the ectopics and hypotension, which are corrected with the Zalokard and mefentermin respectively. And her baby is normal, but whereas ASD is also observed in her baby, and there is no other limb abnormality in her baby. And regarding this one, the familial history plays a crucial role, because she had one sister who also had the similar kind of upper limb deformity, left upper limb deformity, along with heart disease, which is corrected by operation in the year of 2008. And her mother also had a limb deformity, upper limb deformity.
Dr. Rajendra, time up.
Yeah. And I concluded by saying that a family history is also very important regarding the plan of anesthesia, because a lot of syndromes do present, and clinical correlation is very much important for making the plan of anesthesia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to Judge Dr. Shankar Narayan.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Nicely presented the case.
Thank you so
Very
much.
rare case. Okay. Congratulations. What other plans you have for this case other than epidural, if epidural is failed?
Other than epidural, GA can be considered as a resort, sir, if epidural is not the scenario.
Okay. And post-operative?
Postoperatively, she developed ectopies even with the delivery of the bupropion. So, like the non-epidural top-ups can also be considered, sir, for analgesia, like the to relieve the pain, and other NSAIDs can be given, sir.
Okay, okay. What about tab block or any other?
Yes, sir, tab block can also be given, sir.
Okay. What was the local anesthetics you used?
It's initially the lignocaine is used, sir, and later on the 0.5% bupropion is used during the top-up, sir.
You used 2% lignocaine, no?
Yes, sir. 2% lignocaine, sir.
10 ml.
Yes, sir. 10 ml, sir.
Okay.
Dr. Rajendra, well-conducted case. And you tell me, you told in chest X-ray cardiomegaly, when I see the chest X-ray figure in your poster, is it looking so much cardiomegaly in the poster?
Like there is a kind of right atrial and the right ventricular enlargement is there, sir.
Okay, and second thing is, for the last 28 years, it was not diagnosed at all. Only when she became pregnant and when she came for ANC, it was diagnosed.
No, sir. She's already diagnosed with it, sir.
Okay. And usually what is the commonest cardiac anomaly you will get with the Holt-Oram syndrome or the heart-hand syndrome? Commonest cardiac anomaly.
Arrhythmias do occur, sir. And
sorry, I wanted to ask, be specific about the valvular heart disease. Which valvular heart disease you get most of the cases, the percentage wise, which is the commonest valvular heart disease?
The left to right shunts do occur, and mitral prolapse and mitral regurgitation also occur, sir.
It is
pertaining to the
regurgitation is the commonest anomaly. If I'm not wrong, it is tricuspid regurgitation.
With the interest of time, can we move to the next speaker?
Please, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajendra. Thank you, judges. Judges, please note our next presenter, Dr. Racha. She is not on the board right now, and Dr. Deepali also.
Okay, ma'am.
So the next is Dr. Navneet Kaur.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, Dr. Navneet, can you share your screen?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, is it visible now?
Yes.
Ma'am, may I start?
And your time starts now.
Ma'am, am I audible? I'm afraid my internet is not very good here.
Turn off your video.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, your time starts now.
Good evening, respected judges. I am Dr. Navneet Kaur. I'll be describing airway management in a case of Golden Heart syndrome. So something about Golden Heart syndrome, it is also known as a oculoauricular vertebral dysplasia, which is a rare congenital disorder. The syndrome was first described by Dr. Maurice Goldenhar in 1952, and the cause of it is believed to be multifactorial. Its incidence is estimated from 1 in every 3,000 to 5,000 live birth, and male to female ratio is 2:1. So why are we so concerned? What are the concerns which bother us in the syndrome? Firstly, it has these patients have limited neck mobility, and there is difficulty in face mask ventilation. And there is also incidence of difficult intubation due to asymmetrical mandibular hypoplasia. There may be tracheal deviation to one side. There may be hemifacial microsomia or microgenitia. So coming to my case, I describe a case of 7-year-old male child already diagnosed as a cause of Golden Heart syndrome and now scheduled for composite graft and reconstruction of ALA. So on evaluation, we found that child has a depressed right malar prominence. His right ear was malformed, nose was deviated to the left side, and right ALA was poorly formed. His all other investigations were normal. We even did an echo to rule out a cardiac anomaly. After taking, we informed everything to the parents, and we took a written informed consent, and we decided to proceed with the fiber optic intubation through a supraglottic airway device. So after securing the IV line and nebulizing the child with 4% lignocaine, after placing all the standard monitors, the child was given pre-medication, and dexamethasone infusion was started at a rate of 1 mics per kg over 10 minutes, which was followed by a face mask induction, and face mask induction with sevoflurane and 100% oxygen. So after this, we inserted a two-size iGel, and through it we inserted a fibroscope, which was already loaded with a 5.5 size endotracheal tube. So after we identified the carena and intubated the patient, we checked the air entry and we ventilated the patient after taking the bronchoscope out. So the only thing different which we did in this case was we inserted a 5-size endotracheal tube to stabilize the already inserted 5.5 size tube. So that we can easily remove the iGel, and we don't accidentally extubate the patient by removing the iGel, which is very common, especially in children, because the size of the length of the tube and the iGel, they sometimes while taking out the iGel, accidentally the endotracheal tube comes out. So after removing this, bilateral entry was confirmed. Anesthesia was managed as per standard protocol. The child was completely stable intra-op and was extubated on table after the surgery. So coming on the discussion part, in difficult intubation in these patients who have congenital syndromes and malformations of the face, there are many modalities of intubation like direct.
1 minute left.
direct laryngoscopy, fiber optic intubation, video laryngoscope, or blind nasal, and even we could go for tracheostomy. But most important step is maintaining the spontaneous ventilation till we secure a definite airway. To conclude, fiber optic guided tracheal intubation through a supraglottic airway device is a safe option to manage a difficult airway in children, and because it provides a reliable patent airway and also serves as a conduit for fiber optic intubation. And using a second endotracheal tube as a stabilizer for the removal of supraglottic airway device, the methods become safe and reliable as the chance of accidental extubation becomes minimal. Thank you. Thank you, judges.
Thank you, Navneet. Over to Krishna.
Yeah, Dr. Navneet, very well conducted.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Just tell me what are other things you can do. This is very well conducted case. And what else plan, second
Sir,
plan, third plan?
If we have a pediatric bougie, instead of inserting a five size tube, we could have used the bougie, sir.
Okay.
We could have used we could have directly gone for a fiber optic intubation if we were confident, sir. We can use a video laryngoscope as well, sir, if pediatric grade is available.
Okay.
So
okay, good.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Shankar.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Navneet. Nicely conducted case.
Thank you, sir.
Golden Earth syndrome is a nightmare for the anesthesiologist. You have done it very nicely.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Navneet.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Judges, please note we have Racha with us.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Serial number. Yes, you're audible. Serial number 7, Ms. Racha Madhavi. Share your screen.
Ma'am, is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, go to the presentation mode.
Ma'am, is it visible?
Black. Previous screen, yeah.
Now is
And
it
your
visible,
time, yes, its presentation is visible. And your time starts now.
Okay. Good evening, one and all. I'm Dr. Madhavi, third year postgraduate from Ashram Medical College, Andhra Pradesh. Today, my poster presentation is about a rare case of left mainstem bronchus mass managed under one lung ventilation. A small introduction. Pneumonectomy is one of the complicated thoracic procedures associated with high morbidity and mortality. Anesthetic management of pneumonectomy is challenging and involves multiple issues for better patient outcomes. The role of single lung ventilation involves protecting one lung from ill effects of fluid from the other lung. A familiarity with the use of double lumen tubes, bronchial blockers, endobronchial tubes, fiber optic bronchoscopy, and physiology of one lung ventilation is essential to the performance of safe anesthesia. Coming to the case details, our patient was a 41-year-old male who was presented with chief complaint of cough with expectoration, shortness of breath, and also associated with chest pain. He is also known case of bronchial asthma since 14 years and is on regular medication. He has a past history of pulmonary tuberculosis. Surgical plan was left total pneumonectomy through left posterolateral thoracotomy approach, patient under right lateral position. Coming to the preoperative assessment, history of bronchial asthma is present since 14 years. He is on regular medication, that is beclomethasone, salbutamol, rotahilas, and there is a history of pulmonary tuberculosis. He took antitubercular treatment for 6 months. General physical examination, patient was conscious and coherent, moderately built and nourished, no pallor, no icterus, no cyanosis, no clubbing, and no lymphadenopathy and edema. Coming to the vitals are within normal limits. Coming to the systemic examination, under respiratory system, there are decreased breath zones on the left side. Airway examination, there is no difficult airway anticipated. Investigations all are within normal limits. ECG shows inverted T waves in lead 2 and flat T waves in V3 to V6. Chest X-ray showed left lung collapse. This is an image showing preoperative X-ray showing left lung collapse. 2D echo, the ejection fraction is 50%, 55%, no regional wall motional abnormality, fair LV systolic function, mild MR, mild TR, mild PAH, minimal pericardial effusion, and no clots. PFTs showed mild obstruction. And the lesion was confirmed by video bronchoscopy. It was a large irregular grayish white lesion, occluding the left main bronchus completely with mild bleeding on touch. Coming to the anesthetic management, preparation and pre-medication. 16 gauge IV cannula is placed, cross-matching was done, and blood clot ready. Fentanyl patch was applied on the right upper chest for perioperative pain control. Central line and arterial line was secured. IV midazolam and IM glycopyrrolate are given. Intraoperative management. All monitors are connected to the patient. Pre-oxygenation is done for more than 5 minutes. Patient was induced by IV propofol. Muscle relaxation was achieved by vecuronium. A 39 French double lumen tube is inserted following neuromuscular blockade. Both tracheal and bronchial cups were clamped sequentially and bilateral ventilation confirmed by auscultation. Tip of the double lumen tube is confirmed by fiber optic bronchoscopy. Patient was maintained under pressure control ventilation. Intermittent suctioning was done of both the bronchial lumen and tracheal lumens. Coming to the post-operative management, multimodal analgesia is provided by fentanyl patch
1 minute left.
by using other non-steroidal and anti-inflammatory drugs. Incentive spirometry and chest physiotherapy were adapted for fast recovery. Conclusion: appropriate volume resuscitation by CVP guidance, invasive blood pressure monitoring, placement of double lumen tube using fiber optic bronchoscopy, appropriate management of one lung ventilation, and multimodal analgesia with fentanyl patch and other NSAIDs favored us for smooth conduction of surgery with good hemodynamic parameters. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges.
Ma'am,
Sir.
Dr. Racha Madhavi,
Yes,
very good, very nicely conducted case.
Thank
You
you.
tell me what are the other post-op pain management modalities you can think of?
We can give thoracic epidural, sir, but we opted fentanyl patch for better hemodynamic stability. With epidural, there will be hypotension and hemodynamic compromise.
Okay, what about paravertebral or thoracic erector spinae?
Yes, sir, but feasibility of the patient and compliance of the patient, we approach fentanyl patch.
Okay. Why do you think it is a challenging case for you?
Because it is more prone for hypoxemia during intraoperative period, sir.
That's all one lung ventilation with whatever this thing, it is a challenge. I definitely agree with you. But in this case.
And also placement of lumen tube, sir. Actually, at our setup, because if fiber optic bronchoscopy is available, it is easy for us. But if in the situations where it is not available, it is very challenging for the placement of double lumen tube.
Okay. So your poster presentation main aim is to present the difficulty of placement of double lumen tube and conduct of the case.
Hypoxemia, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Shankaran, please.
So good evening, Racha.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Very nicely explained your case.
Thank you, sir.
Nicely done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Racha, and thank you, judges. Judges, next we have Dr. Deepali. Dr. Deepali, share your screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Start your presentation.
Good evening, ma'am. My presentation is visible?
Yes. And your time starts now.
Good evening, respected judges. The topic of my poster presentation is enhanced recovery after surgery. Sounds a plain topic, but very important for our profession. The idea of enhanced recovery is to reduce the exaggerated stress response as a consequence of any major surgery, which imparts benefit to the patient and health services as a whole. So the phases of ERAS consist of preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative phase. Preoperative phase consists of patient information and education, which is the first and foremost important thing to do. Second is nutrition and fasting time. The aim is to blunt the body's response to surgery. The surgical stress release catecholamine, which causes relative lack of insulin, further hyperglycemia, and increased risk of wound healing, increased risk of infection, and poor wound healing. Third is the pre-anesthetic medication, beta blockers and alpha-2 agonist. Beta blockers meant to suppress the sympathetic suppression, and alpha-2 agonist. Fluid and carbohydrate loading. Carbohydrate loading not only reduces insulin resistance, but also improves muscle function by reducing the nitrogen and protein loss. It is also seen to reduce pre-operative thirst, hunger, and anxiety. Allowing solid food up to 6 hours pre-operatively and a carbohydrate-rich drink, preferably containing complex carbohydrate like maltodextrins, 800 ml at bedtime and 400 ml 2 hours prior to surgery is the recommended protocol. Antibiotic prophylaxis 30 to 60 minutes before the incision. Repeated doses is needed in prolonged procedures for more than 3 hours or if there is a massive blood loss. Antibiotic antithrombotic prophylaxis and smoking and alcohol cessation 1 month prior to surgery. Intraoperative phase consists of anesthetic protocol. The target is the rapid awake of the patient. Anesthetic technique consists of balanced anesthesia, total IV anesthesia, short-acting agents like for hypnosis, propofol, sevoflurane, and desflurane preferred. For analgesia, sufentanil, remifentanil is preferred. The relaxant of choice is atracurium. No nasogastric tubes are drained for mid or lower abdominal surgeries. Prevention of post-op nausea, vomiting. ERA's recommendation is use of dexamethasone at induction or 5-HT3 receptor antagonist, for example, ondansetron at the end of surgery for moderate risk, and TIVA, dexamethasone at induction and 5-HT3 receptor antagonist or droperidol or metoclopramide near the end of the surgery for high-risk case. Fluid management, goal is maintain central euvolemia, minimize salt and water excess. Low-risk surgery, zero balance fluid therapy can be given at the rate of 1 to 3 ml per kg per hour. Major surgery, for major surgery, we can do goal-directed fluid therapy. Hypothermia prophylaxis, forced warm air devices, warmed intravenous fluids and warm humidified gases should be used. Post-operative analgesia, multimodal analgesia. For gut motility, enhancers such as chewing gum have been extensively studied for reduction in incidence of post-operative ileus. The use of chewing gum should be encouraged starting on post-op day 1, and each patient should chew 1 stick of chewing gum for at least 5 minutes 3 times a day. Early removal of catheters. All patients undergoing lower abdominal surgeries have their catheter removed within 72 hours of surgery, and in most of the other surgeries, the urinary catheter should be removed within 24 hours. Early mobilization aim to reduce the skeletal muscle loss and improve respiratory function and oxygen delivery. I conclude by saying that enhanced recovery after surgery is a boon for the patient undergoing surgery, and for this, anesthesiologists play a major role. Thank you. Thank you, judges.
Thank you. Over to Dr. Shankar.
Hello, Deepali. Nice presentation about ERAS.
Good evening, sir. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. So what about regional anesthesia in ERAS?
Sir, regional anesthesia can be preferred. Sir, I didn't understand your question. Regional anesthesia in what sense?
Wherever possible, you have to include
so regional anesthesia is preferred over the general anesthesia because it is having lesser complication.
Yeah, and you have to use opioid sparing. You have
opioid sparing anesthesia as it is having more post-op complication like paralytic ileus, pruritus, nausea, etc.
So wherever feasible and wherever possible, you have to use the regional anesthesia.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Deepali nicely presented, and as Dr. Shankaran sir was mentioning, regional anesthesia plays a main role. If you see ERAS protocol for joint replacement surgeries nowadays, they preferably go for the regional.
Yes,
and
sir.
can you tell me few points about ERAS after cesarean? There is a particular some points about the LSCS ERAS protocols.
Early mobilization.
Okay. What about the fasting? What about post-op?
For post-op pain, we can do patient-controlled epidural.
No, that is okay. TAB block, QL block, whatever the block. What about the fasting status after the surgery, cesarean, in ERAS protocol? And what about breastfeeding? What about cord clamping? See, you spoke about in general about the ERAS protocol, but nowadays, if you see, there is a particular ERAS protocol for each and every surgery.
Specific,
Specific surgeries. One of the main day-to-day what we are doing his cesareans.
Early.
And yeah. So that is the only one thing I wanted to
Hello.
specify. Otherwise, nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dipali.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, judges.
Thank you, judges.
Next, we have others, Dr. Krusha. Dr. Krusha, share your screen. Go to the presentation mode.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Good evening, one and all present here.
And your time starts now.
Good evening, one and all. I will be discussing about the anesthetic management in a rare case of prune belly syndrome posted for cystoscopy. So the case summary for this patient was, it was a 1-month-old patient with complaints of decreased maturation and stool with decreased appetite since birth, posted for cystoscopy. Birth history was, it was a 34-week-old normal vaginal delivery with a birth weight of 3 kgs. Baby cried immediately after birth and was immunized up to date. Patient was antenatally diagnosed with hydroureter and hydronephrosis in the 7th month of pregnancy. Weight gain was only 400 grams in a span of 1 month and 20 days. The baseline vitals for the patient were a pulse rate of 150 per minute regular, respiratory system was air entry was bilaterally equal, cardiac status was okay with a per abdominal presentation of a doughy abdo. MPC was adequate mouth opening. All the hematological investigations were within normal limits. 2D echo showed a large fenestrated secundum ASD with a left to right shunt with a good biventricular function. USG abdopelvis showed a marked laxity of anterior abdominal wall, bilateral hydronephrosis with thinning of cortex and bilaterally dilated, and tortuous ureters. Introduction. Prune belly syndrome, also known as Eagle-Barrett or Triad syndrome, is a multi-system congenital disorder which primarily affects males. It affects 1 in 25,000 individuals. It comes with a characteristic triad of abdominal muscle deficiency, urinary tract abnormality, and bilateral cryptorchidism. Induction for this case was done as follows. After a thorough preoperative assessment under ASA 3 with high-risk SICU and ventilator consent, the patient was taken inside the OT and all the monitors were attached. Patient was pre-oxygenated with 100% O2 for 3 minutes. Injection glycopyrrolate at the dose of 0.014 mg was given as pre-medication. Induction was started with oxygen plus sevoflurane. Injection atracurium 1.75 mg was given. Patient was intubated with 3.5 mm oral uncuffed endotracheal tube. Patient was maintained on oxygen, sevoflurane and air on assisted ventilation with Jackson-Rees circuit. In left lateral position, caudal block was given with 4 cc of 0.25% bupivacaine using a 22 gauge 1-inch needle. Intraoperatively, there was minimal blood loss and adequate fluid management was maintained. At the end of surgery, when the patient was reversed, patient developed bronchospasm, which was managed by silent puff and maintaining the airway and saturation. Patient was shifted to PICU for observation.
1 minute left.
The anesthetic challenges that we faced were congenital cardiac defects, renal dysfunction as a result of hydronephrosis, urinary tract infection, congenital renal dysplasia, hypoplasia, congenital chest deformities or scoliosis which may lead to lung hypoplasia and pulmonary dysfunction and decreased functional residual capacity, poorly developed abdominal wall muscles along with a flat diaphragm leading to pooling of secretions and atelectasis, postural drainage, chest physiotherapy and antibiotics should be used to decrease pulmonary complications post-operatively. Conclusion, there are no known contraindications to specific anesthetic drugs. Anticipate difficult ventilation, aspiration and bronchospasm. Profuse secretions and inability to clear them leads to airway irritability. Hence, regional anesthesia must be preferred wherever possible. Regional techniques for pain relief such as caudal, epidural or peripheral nerve block may expedite recovery from anesthesia and also decrease the need of anesthetic agents. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges. Dr. Krishna.
Dr. Krishna Shah, very
Yes,
well
sir.
conducted case, nice. And you told about the cardiac anomalies And what was your finding preoperatively on the echo evaluation or cardiac?
Biventricular function was normal, but there
Okay.
was atrial septal defect.
Okay.
But since the patient had a good BVF, so there was no contraindication for the surgery. Like
Okay.
cardiac
You
stability was there.
you told about this thing. Why bronchospasm happened post-operatively?
So we were suspecting that due to some secretions, there could have been airway irritability,
Okay.
which could have led to spasm, sir.
Okay. You used 3 point, which size you told? 3.5 uncuffed. ETT?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what about post-op analgesia? You mentioned about caudal block and peripheral nerve blocks. What peripheral nerve blocks you are
So
thinking of?
wherever feasible, because so this is a pediatric case for a 1-month-old baby, so we'll prefer caudal block because peripheral nerve blocks are not.
Okay. So what drug you used in caudal? Any
We use
adjuvant?
bupropion, sir, 0.25%.
Okay. Any adjuvants you used?
No, sir.
Okay. Any other block you can think in this? Even 1 day old baby also we have to give the block. I mean, wherever possible nowadays, correct? So what other you can think of?
The erector spiny block can be given, sir.
Okay. QL block? Can we give?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Shankar Narayan, please.
Yes.
Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Krishna. Nicely done case about prone belly syndrome for cystoscopy, no?
Yes, sir.
What caudal anesthesia? What drug you have used?
0.25% bupropion.
No adjuvants were used.
No, sir.
You could have used adjuvants, no? For post-operative analgesia.
Yes,
What
sir, but
adjuvants you are using for caudal anesthesia for pediatrics?
for pediatrics, so we can say like in our institute we have been using. Yes, sir. So we have been using bupropion and ligno-ADR. Like we have not really used any adjuvant in such small like.
Adjuvants they can prolong the duration of post-operative analgesia, no?
Opioids can be used, sir.
Not opioids. Opioids can cause post-operative respiratory
that
or urinary retention or other problems. You can use clonidine, no?
Clonidine, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna and judges. Judges, please note we have come to the last session.
Yes, ma'am.
The last session is by Dr. Ria. Dr. Ria, unmute yourself. Share your screen.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Go to the presentation mode, slideshow. Okay. And your time starts now.
Good evening all. Good evening, judges. The topic of my poster is role of inhalation anesthesia in patients with motor neuron disease. Patients with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis present unique challenges to the anesthetist. The goal of anesthesia is to provide techniques with minimal interference with the disease pattern and also providing optimum operating conditions and adequate analgesia. Coming to the history, here is a 47-year-old gentleman. It's a known case of motor neuron disease, presented with the gradually progressive weakness of bilateral lower limb since 2 years and right upper limb since 1 month, and also breathlessness on exertion since 3 weeks. He was on tab riluzole 50 mg BD, tab baclofen 2.5 mg HS, and clonazepam 0.5 mg BD. On further evaluation, he was incidentally detected to have a thyroid nodule on PET CT and was posted for total thyroidectomy. On examination, the patient is afebrile, conscious oriented, Vitals were stable. Room air saturation was 96%. CNS examination showed hypertonia in bilateral lower limbs with the power of 2/5 in both lower limbs and right upper limb power of 4/5. Sensory examination was normal and there were no bowel and bladder disturbances. Airway examination also was within normal limits. All investigations done in the pre-op period were normal. Pre-operatively, patient is start on inspiratory and expiratory muscle training exercises, manual coughing, chest physiotherapy, and overnight BiPAP. The plan of anesthesia was general anesthesia with endotracheal tube without muscle relaxants. On the day of surgery, the patient is shifted to the operating room and standard pre-incision monitors were attached and the IV access was secured. The patient is pre-oxygenated for 3 minutes with 100% O2. Anesthesia is induced with IV fentanyl 2 mics per kg, propofol 2 mg per kg, and sevoflurane with the dial concentration of 8%. Intermittent positive pressure ventilation was provided via face mask for 3 minutes, and after which video laryngoscopy was done, and trachea was intubated with a flexometallic endotracheal tube of internal diameter 8 millimeters. No coughing, barking, laryngospasm, or bronchospasm was noted. Intraoperatively, the patient was hyperventilated with a tidal volume of 500 ml, FiO2 0.5 with nitrous oxide, and EtCO2 was maintained between 25 to 30 millimeters mercury, and the sevoflurane was set at 2 to 3% dial concentration. Post-induction, IV Dexona 8 mg was given, and hypotension was noted, which was treated with phenylephrine boluses and followed by noradrenaline infusion. Later, IV Hydrocort 100 mg was given. The surgery was uneventful. A trial of extubation was done, but due to poor ventilatory efforts by the patient, we planned for post-op assisted ventilation and patient was put on pressure support mode. After 4 hours,
1 minute
surgery,
left.
once the patient is fully with no signs of respiratory exhaustion, the patient is extubated and electively put on NIV. The patient is continued on overnight BiPAP till the day of discharge on post-op day 4. General anesthesia in patients with ALS is associated with exaggerated respiratory depression. These patients are vulnerable to hyperkalemia following succinylcholine administration. They're also found to have prolonged responses to non-depolarizing muscle relaxants. So I would like to conclude by saying that in patients with ALS, it may be safest mode of anesthesia would be to use without muscle relaxants, and excessive opiates can be avoided if we use inhalation anesthesia. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to judges.
Dr. Ria, is well conducted case, nice. And you tell me in ALS, what are the other things you would have done in this case? Not GA or not, you did excellent, but tell me other options for getting this surgery done. In at most dangerous situation, what can we do other than GA?
Sir, other option is regional anesthesia, but thyroidectomy under regional anesthesia is rarely performed with cervical plexus block.
Which plexus block? It has been done.
Sorry, sir.
The thyroidectomy has been done with the regional anesthesia. There are so many case reports and so many things. So, okay, one thing is okay. So, why did you, any other causes of this thing other than your sevoflurane?
Sorry, sir?
Other than this, your this intraoperative and postoperative delayed recovery, is there any other causes you can think of other than, obviously this is whatever you are suspecting is correct. Other things you can think of?
In what sense? Sorry, I didn't get the question.
he was extubated, then delayed the response, then you put him on NIV and all. Any other causes you can
Yes,
think
sir.
of other than this? What are the differential diagnoses you can think of?
For posture ventilation, sir.
Yeah. See, you usually in ALS, you can get in muscle relaxants. So you avoided muscle relaxants for that purpose, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then you end up with sevoflurane 8% you induced. Then he had hypotension. Then it was managed with phenylephrine and extubated, delayed recovery, and you put on NIV. So any other causes you can think of all these things?
Respiratory depression due to opioid
Okay.
use.
Okay. Other things? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Dr. Shankar Narayan, sir, please. Dr. Shankar Narayan, sir, please.
Sir, unmute. Yeah.
Good evening, Ria.
Good evening, sir.
Sir was talking about what other things. So cervical epidural would have been tried, no? Good choice.
Yes, sir.
In this case.
Could be
Cervical
tried, sir.
epidural. There are many
But
case reports.
no, it's very, no, sir.
Cervical epidural.
No, sir.
So many case reports are there. Okay. And along with GA, you could have given superficial cervical plexus block, no?
Yes, sir.
It could have reduced
posture.
inhalational anesthetic as well as your analgesia requirements.
Sir, initially our plan was trying to extubate the patient. So for that we tried inhalational anesthetic, which could be, which could lead to more faster recovery.
Okay, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ria.
Thank you.
On behalf of ISA WebCon Kerala 2020, I thank all our judges, Krishna sir and Shankar sir, and also our participants.
Ma'am, to conclude, thank
Yes,
you
sir.
very much for ISA Kerala for giving opportunity to be part of with your great conference, and nice to be with you once again. Last time we were on ground and now through virtual.
Yes.
Really thankful to all the state members and everyone, and happy Kerala Day. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ISA Kerala and Dr. Venkatagiri, sir, for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this CME, online CME webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shankar sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Once again, I thank you all. Thank you for your valuable time. Next, we'll move to the next session, that is PG paper, non-competitive category.